had a big weekend for spring football. As April draws to a close, these last couple weekends of April, typically really big for spring games. I talked about my experience at the Texas spring game a little bit. Last weekend, we had A&M. We had a plethora of other schools. But this weekend, some of the biggest names in college football took to the spring stage. Alabama, Notre Dame, LSU. We got to see Coach Prime for the first time at Colorado. We got to see Matt Rule for the first time at Nebraska. Let's just do a whip around here through these spring games. And after that, we will get into some more NFL draft coverage. But, starting at the top, I think Alabama, we talked about this, over the course of the last couple episodes, but Alabama has one of the most intriguing quarterback battles to me in the entire country coming into this year between Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson. Neither one really impressed yesterday in the spring game. No word on the weather conditions. I know that that's a typical excuse from some fan bases.
It was windy, okay?
Could have been windy, we never know. But Simpson and Milroe combined to throw 3 interceptions, I believe, on about 62 pass attempts between the two of them. Neither one of them really did a lot to separate themselves in that competition. So, Garrett, I don't want to beat a dead horse here because I know we've talked about this quarterback competition, easy for me to say, before on this program. But yeah, any takeaways from that performance that we got yesterday that kind of put that action on the field?
I mean, look, it just kind of goes to what we've been talking about that, this is going to be the first time since, I think we said 2015, that they're not going to have a guy who's, all world, won a championship or going to the NFL, top draft pick. Like, it's been a while since they haven't had a guy that reliable behind center. And that's going to be interesting to watch. Jalen Milroe, obviously, hasn't necessarily been impressive in the action we've seen him in so far. He's an absolute stud of an athlete. The kid can run. Kid is very physical, and he's made some good throws, obviously, but just hasn't necessarily been impressive as a pocket passer overall. Simpson, haven't still seen very much of him, but what we saw in the spring game, not necessarily impressed. Yeah, it's the spring. Yes, they're breaking in a new offensive coordinator. Yes, there's all those factors. Okay, all the things that you're going to say. Well, it's just because Tommy Rees just got here. We're just waiting for him to get his offense installed and da-da-da-da. But I think if you're Alabama fans, you have to look up and say, it's been a couple of years of watching Georgia win the national championship, and we're not too happy with that. It's been a couple of years since you've had that taste of glory, and it's funny to say, oh, it's been like 3 years, so they're starting to get a little antsy over there. When most of our teams haven't won it,
would die to be in that position.
But yeah, there's like 125 that haven't touched a national championship trophy in like a decade, so or more than that for most of them. But it just goes to show that the standard at Alabama obviously is different. Right. Obviously, it's going to be a different standard for the greatest coach of all time, probably with Nick Saban. I think you have to look at this and be a little concerned. I think that's worth noting is that the quarterback situation isn't exactly there. Who do they have in the stable? I know Jahmyr Gibbs is out. Not as many running backs that I'm necessarily confident in. They have some good ones and some talent, but maybe not as many guys that I would say that's your top of the line guy. At the receiving core, I'm not necessarily as impressed with guys as I have been in the past. And so I think you just have to look around at Alabama and say, we're going to need some guys to step up as a team, get some real good coaching out of Nick Saban to get this team to be where it normally needs to be, especially with teams like LSU really coming up and looking really good. We'll talk about them in a second. Yeah. And especially knowing that you're going to have to play Tennessee, who's going to continue to look good. You might have a couple of losses on your schedule. And it feels weird to say talking about Alabama, right? It feels weird to say that about Alabama, but that might be where we are.
Yeah. And, I think this is not just from a quarterback perspective. We've really talked about that. We've kind of beaten that horse to death. The quarterback position, even when they were making the transition from Hurts to Tua or Tua to Bryce Young, you could look at the spring game and see, wow, that guy right there, he is obviously the heir apparent. He is going to take the baton. He is obviously going to be in the NFL in a couple years. First time since 2015 that we cannot say that about the guy playing quarterback for Alabama. We also, at every other position, I feel like just have more unproven talent than we have in close to a decade, probably, for Nick Saban's Alabama team. It's going to be fascinating to see if this staff can put together, I know they're going to be competitive, obviously, but a championship caliber run this season with all that unproven talent. Obviously, they have so many blue chips. They're still going to have one of, if not the highest blue chip ratios in the nation. Maybe Georgia might be a little higher. I haven't checked that statistic yet for this year, but it is going to be a situation that we haven't seen in Tuscaloosa in quite some time. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I don't think a lot of those questions were answered this weekend. So going into the summer, going into the fall camp, it's going to be fascinating to watch the headlines come out of Tuscaloosa. Let's actually stay in the SEC West and talk about those LSU Tigers, because for all the questions that Alabama has, I think LSU has just as many answers right now, because the big knock on their offense was, can they be explosive in the passing game with Jaden Daniels? Well, all he did yesterday was go 10 of 11 for over 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. And you put in our notes, is he on Heisman watch in the spring? And I think the answer to that question is absolutely yes. Maybe one of the only players that could take it from him is his teammate on the other side of the ball, Harold Perkins, who just picked up right where he left off in the spring game. Unblockable at times last year and kept that up on Saturday. So, I mean, if you're betting right now, if you're putting your money right now on the SEC West champion, you're probably, if you're making a smart bet, it's probably on LSU, right? Not Alabama.
Yeah, LSU has to be the heavy favorite right now, especially after what Jaden Daniels just did. He's an absolute stud. They put together, I think it was like a 70-yard touchdown pass there somewhere. I think I might be wrong about that. That might have been a different spring game, but regardless, he looked amazing. He looked like he picked up right where he left off. Harold Perkins, I mean, just an absolute beast right there. They had some really good linebackers. The one thing that, you look at the reports coming out of that spring game, not necessarily as strong at corner, which I know is typically a place where they play really, really well. I know there's a lot of turnover there. They've got a lot of transfers coming in, notably Denver Harris from Texas A&M going over to LSU to, kind of take a job there. We'll see kind of how that whole situation shakes out. Coach Kelly was not super pleased with the performance in the spring game. That might just have something to do with Jaden Daniels, though, right? That might just have something to do with the fact that he's a bad man. And I do think that if you're looking around just at the beginning of the season, you're looking for who's going to be the quarterback at the team that's going to be in the lead and playoff position. Those teams typically tend to have Heisman-type guys. How do you argue against LSU right now? I mean, I'm not necessarily afraid of Alabama if I'm LSU. There's nobody else in the SEC West that really scares me. I know A&M has lots of talent, but they've yet to prove that they're going to do anything with it.
Well, and a lot of that talent has just gone right out the window.
Oh, yeah, well, and a lot of it has gone out the window. You're right. No, and Arkansas, they have a quarterback coming back. Didn't play very well last year. Mississippi schools, they're going to be just fine, but we still got a lot to worry about at the quarterback position for Ole Miss, and who knows what that looks like. I don't think anyone's really afraid of Auburn right now, unfortunately. You just look around and you're saying, I don't know that we're necessarily scared of these guys on our schedule. You could see an LSU team, 9-0, 10-0 at the end of the season with Jaden Daniels steering the ship and prime Heisman candidacy. And when you look across the nation, they don't like to do repeats. So maybe Caleb Williams isn't that guy. I don't know. We'll see. But no, Jaden Daniels is absolutely on Heisman watch, and I think that LSU is absolutely in the driver's seat if they can finish the corner position. Right, that was the only real issue on that squad. They have good running backs. Noah Cain coming back. They're going to be stacked across the board, and they're going to be better on the inside. That was the real question coming out of last season, was in terms of the defensive tackles. There wasn't necessarily a whole lot there. They're a little bit small, a little undersized. Teams could sometimes run the ball on them. They're getting a couple guys back from injury, getting a couple guys in that are going to be a lot better on the interior. I think that they're going to be in for a huge season.
I'm right there with you. I think I was going back and forth on LSU, but I think I'm on the bandwagon now to fully back them as the post-spring penciled in SEC West champion. I think when we do our next 3-Tech Top 25, not sure when that's going to be, but they're probably going to be in the top 5 for all three of us, if I had to guess. Another team that stock is definitely up based on offseason acquisitions, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Sam Hartman is probably the biggest high-impact transfer portal pickup, maybe in the entire nation, definitely at the quarterback position this year. And he now might have an explosive number 1 receiver in Jaden Greathouse, the early enrollee. Listen to Statline Garrett, caught 11 passes for 118 yards in his Fighting Irish debut. Obviously, that's coming from multiple different quarterbacks, and he'll just have Sam Hartman throwing. But, man, Sam Hartman just couldn't have been better on Saturday. 13 of 16 for 189 and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And he could be the piece that the Fighting Irish need to just really finally be explosive on offense. They've always had that identity of ground and pound, maybe hit the tight end for a big play or two per game, and then win on defense. But with Sam Hartman running the show on offense, I think that they could finally have that explosivity that could take them to the next level.
Right. And the big thing with them, obviously, losing Tommy Reese to Alabama, we just talked about him. They're going to be looking for something on offense. They got to figure out something to make the offense, tick, make things go better. I think bringing in some fresh blood, just saying, hey, let's see who's in here, plug some pieces in, see what happens. I think that's going to go a long way for Marcus Freeman's club. Marcus Freeman, he had all this hype coming into last season. They faltered a little bit, ended up with a good, sort of finish to the season, played a lot better than I think most of us expected them to towards the end of the season. And I think they're going to carry that into next year. Look, Jaden Greathouse, I don't know how he didn't get more offers and more committable offers to big-time programs. Good job with Notre Dame jumping on that early and getting in there, making sure they could get him to head on up there and play for Notre Dame. I got to say, man, Sam Hartman, he is that guy, right? We talked about it with Jaden Daniels. Sam Hartman might be challenging him this year. The issue, obviously, for Notre Dame not playing in a conference, maybe not always having that good a quality of win. Their schedule, I can't remember what the schedule looks like this year. I don't have it up in front of me, but it should be a very winnable schedule for them with Hartman at the helm.
I've got it pulled up, and typically, yes, that is the knock on Notre Dame. That will not be a problem this year if they can run the table. They open with Navy in Ireland. They've got Tennessee State at NC State, Central Michigan, but then it gets really fun. Ohio State at home at Duke, who could be a dark horse ACC championship contender, at Louisville, Caleb Williams and USC at home before closing against Pitt at Clemson, Wake Forest at Stanford. So
wow,
we've got a lot of opportunities this year, man. And I think Sam Hartman will be able to go toe-to-toe. He's shown it in the past at Wake Forest with lesser talent around him. Notre Dame is going to be one to watch this year. If they can navigate that schedule, even if they slip up one time, if they finish that schedule at 11-1, I think they're definitely a good shot for that number 4 spot in the playoff. A team that some other people have said could make a TCU-like run. I don't really see this, but we've been open about that before. But Colorado, man, I don't know how much we want to get into the game for sure. We can talk about Shedeur Sanders' performance yesterday, but if you haven't seen it, just look on Twitter for the video comparing the 2022 spring game to the 2023 spring game. You can count on your hands and feet the number of people in the stands in the 2022 spring game for Colorado. This year it was a packed house, not a lot of empty seats for a spring game. I couldn't tell you the last time there's been this much excitement in Boulder, probably when they won the national championship in 1990. And man, Coach Prime has that program just revved up to take a step forward this year. How big of a step remains to be seen, but the talent is definitely there. The coaching seems like it's going to be there. Now, the only thing that we have to question is how that'll compare to their Pac-12 schedule and facing a couple of tough non-conference tests. But man, the talent was on display yesterday, and he had Shedeur Sanders. I'll just get into the stat line real quick: 16 of 19 for 234 and 3 touchdowns, including a 98-yard touchdown pass. And he hit Travis Hunter for like a 70-yarder, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So first touchdown of the game was the connection to Travis Hunter, guy that could play both ways for Coach Prime. You hear that name, you think he's probably going to be a defensive guy, but definitely getting a lot of reps on offense as well. I know we've beaten Colorado to death. I don't necessarily want to talk a lot about their expectations because we've talked about that a lot, but man, it's fun to have Colorado relevant again, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. And the big thing that I thought about that was the fans came out despite snowy conditions. Like they're having to wipe snow off of their seats. They had to get out there and like treat the field beforehand and everything. Like this was not a fun game from a weather standpoint to show up for. And the place was packed. I mean, it was 45,000 probably strong at a spring game for them, which is, I mean, massive numbers, especially compared to last year.
SEC schools who are
better than a lot of the SEC schools. And we've been critical of Shedeur Sanders. I don't know how much his play yesterday had to do with the fact that it was playing against Colorado's defense. I don't know how much that had to do with it. Probably a lot. But he did look really good. I mean, he looked like the kind of guy who should be warranting, Heisman consideration in the preseason. Now, again, I don't think that that's going to bear. I don't think that he will play at that level for the whole season. I'm perfectly willing to be proven wrong. If Colorado is, if we look up in Colorado's, 7-1 or something like that midway through the season, I'd be thrilled for a Colorado Renaissance tour. That'd be a lot of fun. Travis Hunter did play really well. He caught a little, nice in and out for a touchdown. Ran a really good route, just cooked his guy across from him. And then the 98-yarder went to, I can't remember which one, but one of the very few players that held over from the previous team. He stuck around. It was a blown coverage, just caught it wide open. I think he ran past a couple guys, kind of stuck a guy real quick, and then got in the end zone. So a lot of fun, at least on display for Colorado, which I think is what they need. They just need something fun to root for, something to be there for. We saw it firsthand a couple of years ago. That fan base will get up for a big game. They will show up if the team has something to root for. Give them something to root for. We'll see what can happen. I think that I would slide them at least up out of the cellar in the Pac-12 and put them on like the maybe lower middling type team, which, might be fighting for barely a bowl eligibility type of thing, which already is a huge step in the right direction for Deion Sanders in Colorado.
Yeah, and that is a passionate, rowdy fan base when the Buffaloes are winning, even when they're not winning. It's a very passionate, rowdy fan base, but there's just more of them showing up when they are winning. So I'm excited to see what the Buffaloes can do in year one. A lot of opportunities to, prove themselves very early. Week 1 and week 2 at TCU and hosting Nebraska, the former Big 8 and Big 12 rival in Boulder. I think they get one of those two games. I think Nebraska is definitely more likely, but I think they're going to get at least one of those two games and have a puncher's chance in the other one as well. So we'll see how that all shakes out. We'll see if there's any more portal additions or anything like that for Coach Prime before the season begins.
Gracious, how about that?